What's up, college football addicts? Today we are breaking down Miami's schedule, and I'm going to give you guys the insight on how you should bet your money in our preview, which is presented by BetUS. Miami has one of the most hyped and most look forward to games in week one of anyone in the country. And you look at their records over the last couple of years. Billy Napier, one game under 500, or Mario Cristobal is one game under 500. Billy Napier, a little bit even lower than that with a tough couple of seasons. He's 2 games under 500. And you'd say, like, man, how can this game be so hyped? Well, something about Florida-Miami. I think I'm going to this game. I think I'm going to be there in the swamp, in attendance for it. And I couldn't be more excited. This game means so much, not only to both these coaches, to both these fan bases, but really college football in general. We get a bunch of Miami fans that comment, man, he doesn't hate on us on this channel like he does the other one. Correct. I'm going to keep things pretty unbiased. I'm going to try and keep things pretty fair. You may like the prediction, you may not, but do me a favor. Hit the subscribe button. If you're a Florida, if you're a Miami fan, join us here on College Football Addiction. That Florida game to start it, man, I look at that game and, I really have a hard time. I won't bury the lead here. I have a hard time seeing how Florida wins this game. I have to almost invent scenarios in my mind for Florida to win this game, and they just don't seem like what's most likely. Obviously, Florida down their top running back in Montrell Johnson. They lost their best running back to Georgia in ETN. I'm not super low on Mertz, but when I look at the quarterback battle, I think that Mertz has probably a higher floor, but Cam Ward has a much higher ceiling. So if both quarterbacks play up to their potential, I think that Ward has a better game. If both team quarterbacks play poorly, I think that Mertz probably has a better game because he's not going to have 3 or 4 turnovers like Ward has had in the past. But I think if both teams kind of play average, Ward's probably going to have a little bit better game. It's not just running back. It's not just quarterback. When I look at the trenches, I think Miami already had the better trenches going into this season, going into the offseason, post-spring. And then Florida loses Jamari Lyons, a really good rotational piece on the defensive line. Florida's offensive line, based on all reports, is not putting it together. And, man, I think Miami might have the best front seven in the ACC. And so you're going to go up against Miami's front seven with a banged-up offensive line, an offensive line that can't figure things out, that can't protect Graham Mertz, who's coming off an injury. And, shout out to Graham Mertz's toughness, but if Florida's offensive line isn't good and their running back, they lost their best 2 running backs from last year and not going to be able to play in this game, you lost Ricky Pearsall, and I know I like Eugene Wilson a lot, but I don't see, and you're losing defensive linemen too. I don't really see how you win. Now, again, you win in the trenches, and I know that's cliche, but I think that's where Miami's got a huge advantage. Florida probably has an advantage in the secondary, but I don't know how much the secondary matters if you're not getting a pass rush off, right? Florida's good DBs or better DBs than Miami has. I don't think they can just cover forever. And so what is the path to a Miami win? Well, Miami takes care of the ball. They don't have a bunch of turnovers by Ward. They run the ball effectively against a banged up UF defensive line. They, have enough time and they block the pass rush well enough for guys to eventually get open. And then defensively, they get after Graham Mertz and they shut down the run because Florida's offensive line isn't very good. Well, that kind of all makes sense to me. What's UF's path to victory? Well, you can start to factor in, can crowd noise make a big deal, and can the Swamp be the 12th man, which it absolutely can. You saw the Tennessee game last year, and then you start to think, well, if crowd noise is making a big deal, then can maybe Cam Ward be off his game, and it's his first game in an SEC type environment to open the year at Miami, and they brought in a lot of transfers, so maybe they don't gel together, and I think you're kind of reaching if that's what Florida's going to win because of the crowd noise. Well, Arkansas won in the Swamp last year, and Utah was a last second pick away from winning the Swamp, and Florida State with a backup quarterback won in the Swamp last year. I'm not saying the Swamp isn't intimidating, and it probably won them the Tennessee game last year. Don't get me wrong, but I think you're saying it won them the Tennessee game last year. I think Joe Milton and Cam Ward are two very different quarterbacks, and you control Cam Ward or go into the NFL or this, that, and the other all you want, but to think that Cam Ward's is going to play like Joe Milton and kind of be deer in the headlights, that would surprise me a lot. Possible, sure. I think the path to a Miami victory is much easier to see than the path to a UF victory. Now, we have a couple of weeks before the game gets kicked off in the Swamp. I could certainly change my thoughts, I guess, before that happens, but I'd be pretty surprised at this point if UF won. I'm trending towards picking Miami on this, and in this preview, I am going to pick Miami. I think they're the better team. I think Mario and Napier have both at times cost their teams games, and so if coaching comes into it, I think both teams need to kind of have their guard up, fans of both teams, because I think you want your coach to not be noticed in this game. Miami doesn't need Mario to do anything crazy to win this game. Florida doesn't need Napier to do anything crazy to get in the way and win this game. It should be decided on the field. Coaches need to kind of stay out of this one because they've both had a propensity to blow big games and just do weird things in big games. So I like Miami to win this game. I think it's close. I don't necessarily think Miami wins by 17 or anything like that, but I think Miami goes up to the Swamp and gets the biggest win of Mario's tenure. I know they beat A&M, who ended up firing their coach last year, and they beat the worst Clemson team that we've seen in over a decade. Those are nice wins. Don't get me wrong. I think this would be a huge win for recruiting, for pecking order in the state. You beat Florida now, and then you get Florida State coming later, and if you could beat them, you kind of reassert yourself like, hey, not only we've been doing it on the trail, we're doing it on the field too. We'll talk about that Florida State game here in just a minute. Florida, big game. We spent a lot of time on that, but Miami gets the win. You then play at FAMU. That's an easy win. You play Ball State. That's an easy win. At USF, I think that's a little more tricky than people are giving it credit for. I think USF is on the upward trend. I'd be shocked if Miami dropped this game. And I know Miami's been good for dropping a game they shouldn't here and there over the last few years. You think about Middle Tennessee State, you think about Georgia Tech last year. I get it. Miami usually drops a game they're not supposed to. I think this one's tricky, but I think they win. I don't worry about this a ton. I think that they get this done here in Tampa. It's really close to me. I'm going to be out of town during the game, but I think Miami starts the year 4-0. Here's where it gets tricky. And before we talk about it, I do want to give a little bit of love to BetUS. Watch this quick video. I think it's like 15 seconds. Watch it, and then we'll get right back to it.
Michael Vick at BetUS.com. Catch an incredible 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits, plus 10% gambler's insurance. BetUS, my online sportsbook and casino.
Appreciate BetUS for their support. Here's where I think things start to get tough. This is a 4-game stretch where I think Miami could win every single game. They could lose every single game in this 4-game stretch. I don't think that they would go 4-0. I don't think that they would go 0-4 in it. So I don't want you to hear me and say that I think that they will lose every game or will win every game, but I think this is the toughest stretch of the year for a couple of reasons. First up, Virginia Tech. This is a really good Virginia Tech team who is going to be kind of in, to me, like tier 2 of the ACC. Tier 1 is Florida State, Clemson, and Miami. Tier 2 is like NC State, Virginia Tech, maybe Louisville. Tier 3, if you want me to keep going, is like SMU, Georgia Tech level. And then I think it's everybody else. Virginia Tech, a really good team and a really good mobile quarterback. And this is what I worry about a little bit with Miami. They've got such a good front seven and they pursue so well. Do they maybe over pursue a little bit on drones? I think Virginia Tech is a sneaky good team. People are picking them as a dark horse to maybe get in to the ACC championship. Their schedule sets up fairly well. I think if this was in Blacksburg, I would pick Virginia Tech to win the game. However, it's in Miami, and I think Miami will be lit for this game. I think the fact that they're going to be 4-0 with a win against Florida is huge for them. All the jokes aside about Miami's crowd, this, that, and the other, I think they pack it out. They've got a good attendance here. Virginia Tech travels well. I think the Canes find a way to win this game offensively. I think that Virginia Tech will score. I think that Miami secondary is a question mark. I think Miami secondary is a potential weakness. But I think they do just enough offensively, and Cam Ward has a really nice day to get them to 5-0. At Cal is the next one. And here's the thing. I think Cal can't really match up with Miami. I do think going to the West Coast is a big deal. You look at when this game takes place. You look at the fact that after Virginia Tech, you got to go travel out to Cal and play them. I think that this is tough. You're going West Coast to play Cal, but I still think you win the game. Cal's running back really, really good, but if Miami can contain him, I don't see a way that they've got enough athletes unless the just trip out west completely throws them off. I think you beat Cal, you're 6-0. You get a bye week, and for some reason, Miami is terrible out of bye weeks. I don't know what it is. I bet Mario hates the fact that there are 2 bye weeks this year for the teams because of the way that schedules fall. And I think they would really prefer to not even have a bye week. You're 6-0 at this point, so you want to keep things rolling. I think the bye week gets them. I think at Louisville gets them, as it trips them up as their first loss of the year. I'm high on Louisville. I know that they had some guys that transferred in, that transferred out. I know that one of them came down there to Miami. I think Louisville is going to be another really good team. I think Brom is one of the best coaches in the ACC. I mean, I think Norvell, Sweeney are up there, but I think Brom's right there. The way that he got them to win 10 games last year and go to the ACC championship where they gave FSU everything they wanted. I think they're coached extremely well. I think Louisville is an extremely tough place to play, and I think Louisville gets them. I think they get them for their first loss of the year. They're 6-1. They're still well within reach of all of their goals, the ACC championship, everything else they want to do. I think Louisville's their first loss of the year. And then you welcome Florida State to town, which no bye week in between Louisville and Florida State. So the Noles come to town. I think Florida State's actually undefeated at this point. If they beat Clemson, I'm fairly certain they'll be undefeated. They have to play Notre Dame and Florida later, so they could have more losses coming. But Florida State undefeated, Miami with 1 loss. We haven't seen a game that was that hyped since 2013 when Miami was, I think, 7-0, and so were the Noles. And so this is going to be one that's really hyped. And Miami could certainly beat Louisville, and this might be 2 7-0 teams playing for the right to essentially have the inside track to go to Charlotte. Once Florida State plays Miami, their conference schedule is basically wrapped up. Like they're not going to lose another conference game after that, since Notre Dame's out of conference, Florida's out of conference, and so this game will be for a trip to potentially the ACC championship. And then you look at what Miami has down the stretch with Duke, Georgia Tech, Wake, and Syracuse. I know that Georgia Tech and Q's are on the road, but I'd be pretty surprised if Miami was to lose to any of those 4 teams. I know they lost to Tech last year, but I'll even, before I go back to Florida State, I'll even tell you, I think they beat all 4 of those teams. I think they beat Duke. I think they beat Georgia Tech. I think they beat Wake Forest. I think they beat Syracuse. And it comes down to what happens in the Florida State game. I think if they beat Florida State, they go to the ACC championship, whether they've won or lost against Louisville or Virginia Tech or whatever. If they lose to Florida State, I think they're on the outside looking in at that ACC championship, and maybe somebody like NC State or Louisville or Clemson sneaks in. Florida State a slight favorite in this game right now. I need to see Miami before I'm ready to pick them in this game. And I might have a different pick once we get to the end of October. But as of now, I still have Florida State just slightly ahead. I need to see Mario win some big games. I need to see Mario, and I know Texas A&M last year, but they fired their coach. I get it. I need to see Mario come through and win. I need to see the hype around Cam Ward really be what it is when the lights come on. Cam Ward goes into the swamp and wins that. Cam Ward beats Virginia Tech. Cam Ward goes on the road and beats Louisville. As an FSU guy, I'm going to be pretty worried about that game. No lie. Miami drops the game in the swamp, which they shouldn't. They drop the game against Virginia Tech, which they shouldn't. They struggle with Cal, or they lose to Louisville. Miami comes in this with a couple of losses. Florida State, I think, kind of runs away and is the overwhelming favorite to win the game. Now, the game's always close. I've seen something that says like 70% of the games in this rivalry have been one-score games, and I'd expect this to be another one-score game. But until I see Mario Cristobal kind of come through in the big moments, it's hard for me to pick them just yet. I think Florida State gets the win. I think Miami is now onto their 2nd loss of the season in back-to-back weeks. I think they lose at Louisville. They lose at home against Florida State. Florida State fans will kind of pack that out. It'll be a really good crowd for Miami too. I mean, probably 70-30, maybe 75-25. I think Florida State We'll have plenty of fans there. And again, until I see Mario and Cam and Miami do it, I think that, I'm going to pick the Noles until I've kind of see otherwise. I think Florida State's secondary is going to help them a lot. I talked about Miami having one of the best front sevens in the conference. I think Florida State's is up there too, maybe just behind it. I think Florida State does have the best offensive line in the conference. Miami has better weapons, but Florida State's secondary is much better to me. And so, Florida State's secondary, Miami's weapons, who wins that battle? Florida State's offensive line, Miami's really good defensive line. Who wins that battle? I could see either one of them going either way. I think Florida State's really good against the run. I don't think Miami's as good against the run, though their defensive line and front seven are really good. Like, they just haven't played the run as well. They rush the passer. And then you got DJ versus Cam Ward. Well, I'd probably give a slight nod to Cam Ward. And then you've got Norvell and Mario. I think Norvell's a little bit better of a game day coach, and hasn't really cost his team games like you've seen Mario do pretty consistently throughout his career. All that said, I think, you're probably looking at a field goal or touchdown game one way or the other. And, I'm going to lean Florida State right now. So Miami goes 10-2 on the year. I think at 10-2, Miami backdoors their way into the playoff. That might be as like the 10 or 11 seed. I think they need to go 11-1. And then lose an ACC championship to maybe get a home game. But I think they backdoor their way into the ACC championship game. I think people want to see Miami be good again. I think Miami has a great chance to be good again. I like the over on their win total. 9.5 wins. I know I know this is not the first time we've said, like, man, Miami's schedule sets up really nice for them to have a really good year. But man, I'm trying to find the losses. And again, they could lose to Florida week 1. I'd be surprised if they do. I mean, I guess they could lose to Virginia Tech. They could lose to Louisville. They could lose to Florida State. But man, they could win all those games too. There are no sure losses on this schedule, right? And last year you'd look at Miami's schedule and you say, man, like they're not going to win this one. They're not going to win. There are no absolute guaranteed losses here, and they could win any game. Now, they've shown you that they can lose a lot of games they shouldn't either. But they've got enough talent now where, I think a couple of good recruiting classes, a really good portal class. Miami should win 10 games. If they don't win 10 games, I mean, that's a problem, right? Like they've got 4 tough games: Florida, Virginia Tech, Louisville, and Florida State. All they got to do is split that. They split that, go 2-2. I think they make the playoff. They hit the over on the win total. They've gone from 5 wins to 7 wins to 10 wins. And then I think 2025, man, they try and go on and make a serious run at it. So yeah, I think they hit the over very easily, could get to 11 wins. I don't see them going undefeated. I don't quite think that that's realistic or possible. But man, they could beat Louisville. They could beat Florida State for sure. So 10-2 is my prediction for Miami. Massive improvements in year 3 under Mario. Let me know what your thoughts are, Canes fans. I know you hate me for the FSU loss, but I think that's pretty fair. I think 10-2 would make a lot of Miami fans happy, especially if it meant they were backdooring their way into the playoffs. So let's talk about it down in the comments. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon here on College Football Addiction.